strip her rank. The commander's voice, a gravelly bark accustomed to unquestioning obedience, echoed through the cavernous simulator bay. It was a voice forged in the crucible of ego and entitlement, a sound that demanded attention and expected deference. An officer who shows that little initiative, that little fire in the belly, has no business wearing the wings of a naval aviator. She's a liability, a ghost in the machine, the crowd of younger pilots, a sea of olive-drab flight suits and ambitious, nervous energy shifted on their feet. A few chuckled, low and uncertain, the sound quickly swallowed by the oppressive hum of the facility's climate control systems. They were caught between the institutional respect for a senior officer and the raw, uncomfortable spectacle of a public dressing down. Most simply stare at the floor, at the polished concrete that reflected the cold, blue light of the holographic displays, wishing themselves anywhere else. The target of this verbal barrage, Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma, offered no reaction. She didn't flinch. Her shoulders, trim and straight beneath her flight suit, did not slump. Her gaze, a calm and steady brown, did not waver from the pre-flight checklist displayed on her wrist-mounted datapad. Her silence was not one of submission or fear. It was a profound and unnerving stillness, a vacuum into which the commander's vitriol poured and simply vanished. It was the silence of a deep ocean, unbothered by the frantic thrashing on its surface. But from the shadowed observation deck above, a place reserved for the highest echelons of command, Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne saw something else entirely. He saw not a lack of fire, but a perfectly controlled burn. He saw not a ghost, but a predator holding perfectly still before the strike. He saw the subtle, almost imperceptible shift in her stance as she absorbed the weight distribution of her virtual loadout, a muscle memory so deeply ingrained it was practically instinct. It was the stance of a master duelist, and the Admiral felt a cold, familiar thrill run down his spine, a feeling he hadn't experienced in decades. When the Admiral saw her stance, he leaned forward, his knuckles resting on the cool plasteel of the railing, and a single, dangerous thought formed in his mind. His son, Commander Rex Thorne, had just made the biggest mistake of his career. If you believe that true strength is measured not in volume, but in precision, and that respect is an echo of competence, type quiet professional below. The air in the Naval Aviation Simulation and Warfare Center was a carefully curated cocktail of manufactured sterility and human tension. It smelled of ozone from the server banks, the faint, clean scent of industrial solvents, and the underlying metallic tang of sweat from the dozens of pilots who cycled through its unforgiving digital crucibles each day. This was where careers were forged or shattered. The simulators themselves were marvels of technology, matte black spheres resting on powerful hydraulic gimbals, capable of replicating not just the G-forces of a high-speed turn, but the sickening lurch of a carrier landing in a typhoon. Inside, a pilot wasn't just looking at a screen. They were immersed in a world so real it could hijack the central nervous system, inducing vertigo, panic, and genuine, heart-pounding fear. Commander Rex Bulldog Thorne considered this his kingdom. He had designed the latest scenario, Program Cerberus, a brutal, multi-stage simulation that had, thus far, washed out every single pilot who attempted it. It was his monument to his own perceived brilliance, a digital gauntlet that he believed separated the true warriors from the chairwarmers. He was a man built of loud opinions and sharper angles, his flight suit tailored just a little too tight, his voice always a few decibels louder than necessary. He saw the Navy as a hierarchy of aggression, and he stood proudly at its apex. Anya Sharma, by every metric he valued, was an anomaly. She was not tall or physically imposing. Her voice, when she used it, was measured and technical, devoid of the swagger and bravado that he equated with confidence. She had been assigned to his unit for advanced systems evaluation, a vague directive that he interpreted as command, sending him a glorified technician to observe his masterpiece. Her quiet presence was an irritant, a disruption to the loud, masculine energy he cultivated. So he decided to make an example of her. "Lieutenant Commander," he had boomed, striding onto the briefing floor, making sure every eye was on him. Since you've been so observant these past few weeks, I think it's time you gave Cerberus a try. Show these nuggets how it's done. The offer was a trap, a public challenge designed to humiliate. The other pilots knew it. They had all seen the multi-page after-action reports detailing the impossible cascade of failures Cerberus threw at its victims. Engine flameouts in combat, cascading avionics failures during a storm, a carrier deck slick with virtual ice and beset by vicious crosswinds. It wasn't a test, it was an execution. Yet, Sharma had simply nodded, her expression unreadable. Understood, sir. And now, as she stood by the simulator hatch, performing her methodical checks, his irritation curdled into open contempt. He saw her tap the data pad, her fingers moving with an unhurried grace that he mistook for hesitation. He saw her quiet focus and interpreted it as fear. Every aspect of her professional calm was, to him, a sign of weakness. He needed to break it, to force a reaction, to prove his initial assessment correct. Look at her. He sneered to the pilot next to him, just loud enough for the entire room to hear. She's probably trying to remember which pedal is the gas. This is what happens when we lower our standards for the sake of appearances. We get pilots who are afraid of their own shadow. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the quiet, rhythmic click of the magnetic clamps as Sharma sealed the simulator hatch behind her. The sound was as final and definitive as the closing of a vault door. Inside, she was alone. Outside, Rex Thorne smiled, confident that he had already won. He was about to learn that the most dangerous opponent is the one you never see coming, the one whose competence is so complete it requires no announcement. The world inside Simulator Sphere 7 was a symphony of light and sound, a meticulously crafted illusion designed to fool the senses into a state of absolute belief. As the system booted, the featureless black interior dissolved. A holographic canopy materialized overhead, streaked with digital rain. Beyond it, a churning, bruised purple sky roiled with angry clouds, lit from within by flashes of lightning. The cockpit of an F/37 Talon, an experimental multi-role strike fighter, formed around Anya Sharma. Instrument panels flickered to life, bathing her in the green and amber glow of the multi-function displays. The haptic flight suit she wore pressed against her, simulating the tight grip of G-forces, while the seat rumbled with the deep, resonant thunder of twin fusion turbines spooling up to combat readiness. Through the comm system, a synthesized voice announced "System Online." Neural interface synced. "Welcome, pilot." From his elevated control booth, Commander Thorne took the microphone. His voice now piped directly into Sharma's helmet, a godlike narrator in her private universe. "All right, Sharma. The scenario is simple, even for you," he began, his tone dripping with condescension. "You're on a deep strike mission over contested waters. Your objective is a subterranean bunker complex on Isla Perdida. Standard hostile environment. Should be a walk in the park." He watched the main monitor, which mirrored Sharma's cockpit view. Her head wasn't moving. She wasn't looking around, taking in the spectacle. Her gaze was fixed, cycling through 3 key displays: engine performance, tactical sensor feed, and environmental data. Her hands, resting lightly on the control stick and throttle, were perfectly still. "Get a move on, Commander," Thorne prodded. "The enemy isn't going to wait for you to build up your courage." Without a word, Sharma's thumb flicked a switch. The launch bar engaged. The simulator pitched forward violently as the virtual catapult fired, slamming her back in her seat with a 4G kick. The sensation was brutal, disorienting, designed to induce a moment of panic. But on the biometric feed, Sharma's heart rate had ticked up by a mere 5 beats per minute. She was flying. For the first 10 minutes, the simulation was deceptively calm. She guided the Talon through the storm, her control inputs so small, so precise, they were almost invisible. The aircraft didn't seem to be flying so much as flowing through the turbulent air, a silver needle stitching a perfect line through chaos. Thorne grew impatient. "Initiating Phase 1, he announced, tapping a command on his console. Instantly, a proximity alert screamed in Sharma's ears. The tactical display lit up with a swarm of hostile drone signatures emerging from the cloud cover. They were fast, agile, and programmed with unpredictable attack vectors. The pilots in the observation bay leaned forward. This was where the first wave of failures usually began. Pilots would panic, overcorrect, and bleed too much energy, making themselves easy targets. Thorne watched, expecting to see her jink and weave, to engage in a frantic, defensive dogfight. She did neither. Her left hand moved on the throttle, a subtle adjustment. Her right thumb selected a weapon system. A small, almost imperceptible pressure on the rudder pedals shifted the Talon's nose by a fraction of a degree. She wasn't preparing to dodge. She was preparing to attack. She flew directly into the heart of the swarm, a tactic so suicidally aggressive it defied all conventional doctrine. "What is she doing?" someone murmured in the bay. Thorne smirked. "She's panicking." It's over, but it wasn't. As the first drone screamed towards her, she didn't fire a missile. Instead, a high-energy laser system, a weapon still in its theoretical phase for most pilots, pulsed from the Talon's nose. The beam was invisible, but the effect was not. The drone simply vanished from the screen, its signature replaced by a puff of digital debris. Before the others could react, she pulsed it again, and again, and again. Her movements were an exercise in brutal efficiency. She wasn't chasing targets. She was plotting an intercept course through the entire swarm, eliminating each drone at the precise moment it entered her optimal firing solution. There was no wasted motion, no dramatic maneuvering. It was like watching a master surgeon make a series of incisions, each one perfect, clean, and final. In 90 seconds, the swarm was gone. The sky was empty. A profound, deafening silence filled the simulator bay. The pilots stared at the screen, their mouths agape. They had just witnessed something that wasn't supposed to be possible. In the control booth, Rex Thorne's smirk had vanished, replaced by a tight, thin line of disbelief. He had designed the swarm's algorithm himself. It was supposed to be unbeatable. He felt a prickle of cold sweat on his neck. This was not going according to plan. "Lucky," he muttered into the comm, the words sounding hollow even to himself. "Don't get cocky." Phase 2-inch, he slammed his palm down on a large red button on his console marked Cascade. The real test, the heart of program Cerberus, had just begun. A Cascade failure wasn't a single problem. It was an avalanche of them, each one compounding the last. It was designed to overwhelm a pilot's cognitive capacity, to force them into a fatal choice between multiple, equally catastrophic emergencies. The first alarm was a piercing shriek indicating a primary engine flameout. The simulator lurched violently as the left turbine died, sending the Talon into an uncontrolled spin. The G-forces indicator spiked, the haptic suit crushing Sharma against her seat. Immediately after, a cacophony of alerts followed. "Warning, hydraulic pressure failure. Warning, avionics coolant leak. Warning, navigational systems offline." Red lights flashed across the console like a deadly rash. The main holographic display glitched, dissolving into a shower of static before rebooting to a bare-bones emergency interface. The storm outside seemed to intensify, the rain now mixed with sleet that hammered against the canopy. "You've lost your primary flight controls, Sharma." Thorne's voice cut through the chaos, a hint of triumphant cruelty returning. "You're in a death spiral 1,000 miles from home base. What are you going to do now?" The expected response was panic. A frantic attempt to restart the engine. A desperate fight with a control stick that was now useless. Ejection was the only logical option. But Sharma did not eject. On the biometric feed, her heart rate was elevated, but her breathing remained slow and steady. Her hands moved from the main controls to a secondary panel near her right knee, a set of manual overrides and circuit breakers that 99% of pilots never touched. It was the aircraft's central nervous system, and she was about to perform open-heart surgery at 30,000 feet. Her fingers danced across the panel with a surgeon's precision. She wasn't randomly flipping switches. She was rerouting power, bypassing fried circuits, isolating the damaged hydraulic lines. She was manually reconfiguring the aircraft's architecture on the fly, a feat of technical knowledge and mental fortitude that was staggering to comprehend. The pilots watching were mesmerized. They were seeing a level of mastery they didn't know existed. She's redirecting auxiliary power to the fly-by-wire actuators. One of the senior instructors whispered, his voice filled with awe. She's trying to fly the plane with the circuit breakers. Slowly, miraculously, the violent spin began to slow. By manipulating the flow of power to the individual control surfaces, she was using the electronics themselves as a rudimentary form of control. It was like trying to drive a car by manually firing the individual spark plugs. It was clumsy, ugly, and utterly brilliant. The aircraft was stabilized, but she was still in a storm, flying on one engine, with no navigation and minimal flight controls. She was a dead stick, a multi-billion-dollar glider, falling through the sky. Okay, hot shot. Thorne's voice was strained, the arrogance replaced by a raw, desperate need to see her fail. You stopped the spin, but you're still dead. Your only landing option is the carrier, and you have no way to find it. You're out of tricks. That's when Anya Sharma spoke for the first time since the simulation began. Her voice was perfectly calm, a blade of pure, cold professionalism cutting through the electronic noise. Negative, sir, she said, her tone flat and technical. I have the Star Shell array. On the tactical display, she armed a non-standard weapon system. A moment later, the virtual Talon launched a series of 4 projectiles high into the atmosphere above the clouds. They detonated in sequence, bathing the sky in a brilliant, searing magnesium light. For a brief, 30-second window, the light burned through the storm clouds, revealing the world below. And there, just visible on the horizon, was the faint silhouette of the carrier's strike group. She had used emergency illumination flares as a makeshift celestial navigation tool. The bay was utterly silent now. The sound of jaws hitting the floor was almost audible. She now had a heading. But the final challenge remained, landing a crippled, half-functional aircraft on a pitching deck in a hurricane. A maneuver known grimly as a dead-stick landing, it was considered a theoretical impossibility, a legend pilots told to scare rookies. As she began her descent, lining up with the carrier, every eye was glued to the main screen. Her approach was terrifyingly steep, the aircraft dropping like a stone to maintain airspeed. She wasn't flying, she was falling with style. The landing signal officer's frantic, synthesized voice screamed, "Wave off! Wave off!" from the carrier. She ignored it. With feet to go, a brutal crosswind kicked the Talon sideways. It was over. No one could recover from that. But Sharma's hands moved in a final, coordinated blur. She rerouted the last of her auxiliary power to the landing gear's magnetic clamps, a feature designed to secure the aircraft post-landing. She fired them before she touched down. The clamps engaged the arresting cable for a fraction of a second, a violent, screeching jolt that snapped the aircraft's nose back into alignment, just as the wheels hit the deck. The Talon slammed down, skidded sideways in a shower of sparks, and shuddered to a halt, perfectly centered on the landing strip. The simulation ended. The holographic world dissolved back into the matte black of the sphere. On the main screen, a single line of text appeared in stark, white letters, scenario complete. Landing score, 100/100. Aircraft integrity, 98%. For a full 10 seconds, the only sound was the hum of the servers. The assembled pilots, instructors, and technicians stood as if frozen in carbonite, their minds struggling to process the miracle they had just witnessed. They hadn't just seen a pilot beat a simulation. They had seen a pilot redefine the limits of what was humanly possible. Then, the spell broke. A lone technician started clapping, a slow, rhythmic applause of pure, unadulterated respect. Another joined in, then another, until the entire bay was filled with a thundering ovation that shook the very foundations of the building. In the control booth, Commander Rex Thorne stood rigid, his face pale, his knuckles white where he gripped the console. He stared at the score, the numbers mocking him, dismantling his entire sense of self-worth in a single, brutal moment. He had built an unwinnable scenario, and this quiet, unassuming woman hadn't just won it. She had humiliated it. The hatch to the simulator hissed open. Anya Sharma emerged, pulling the helmet from her head. Her hair was slightly damp, and there was a single bead of sweat on her temple. Other than that, she looked completely unfazed, as if she had just completed a routine paperwork drill. She blinked in the bright light, her calm gaze sweeping over the applauding crowd, a faint hint of confusion in her eyes. She hadn't been performing for them. She had simply been doing her job. As the applause died down, a new sound cut through the air, the heavy, deliberate footsteps of someone descending the metal staircase from the observation deck. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Fleet Admiral Marcus Thorne, commander of the entire Pacific Air Combat Command, stepped onto the floor. His face was a mask of stern authority. His eyes, chips of glacial blue, were fixed on one person, Anya Sharma. The room fell into a silence, so profound it was almost painful. The Admiral's presence commanded a level of respect that bordered on fear. He was a living legend, a man whose decisions shaped global events. He walked past his son, Rex, without a single glance, as if the commander were nothing more than a piece of furniture. He stopped directly in front of Sharma, his towering frame casting a long shadow over her. The pilots held their breath, expecting a formal reprimand for her unorthodox, reckless maneuvers. Rex Thorne held his breath too, a desperate, pathetic flicker of hope igniting within him that his father would somehow validate his initial judgment. The Admiral surveyed Sharma for a long moment, his gaze intense, analytical. He looked at her steady hands, her unwavering posture, her calm, professional demeanor. He saw not a maverick, but a master. Then, he turned to the lead technician at the main control station. His voice was quiet, but it carried the absolute weight of command, cutting through the silence like a diamond blade. "Operator," he said, his voice a low rumble. "Bring up Lieutenant Commander Sharma's full service record. Display it on the main screen." All security clearances waived. "My authority," the technician's fingers flew across his keyboard, his eyes wide. A moment later, Anya Sharma's personnel file blinked onto the massive holographic display for all to see. The room collectively gasped. The screen was a breathtaking tapestry of elite achievement, a career spent entirely in the shadows, at the absolute pinnacle of naval aviation. The first line read, "Unit, Air Development Squadron X, VXX, the Reapers." This was the Navy's most secretive test pilot squadron, a ghost unit that flew aircraft that officially didn't exist. Below that, the data scrolled in a relentless, staccato rhythm of excellence. Flight hours, 7, 500 plus, 4,000 plus in experimental craft. An astronomical number, more than most senior captains amassed in a lifetime. Combat deployments, classified, 7, each one likely a black operation, deep in denied territory. Then came the list of qualifications, a litany of impossible skills, certifications, advanced tactical laser systems, master, neural interface flight controls, lead developer, cascade failure response, doctrine author. The last entry hit the room like a physical blow. She hadn't just mastered the response to a cascade failure. She had written the book on it. She had designed the very protocols they were all supposed to study. Finally, her list of medals and commendations scrolled past, a river of valor, the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, and at the very top, a decoration so rare that most in the room had only ever read about it in history books. The Navy Cross, awarded for heroism, second only to the Medal of Honor. The file wasn't just a service record. It was the resume of a living legend. Rex Thorne stared at the screen, the blood draining from his face. The woman he had mocked as a ghost in the machine was, in fact, one of the primary architects of the machine itself. His program Cerberus, his masterpiece of failure, wasn't a challenge for her. It was a final exam she had written for herself. The Admiral let the information sink in, the silence stretching until it became a palpable force. He then turned back to Sharma. The stern mask on his face softened, replaced by an expression of profound and unequivocal respect. He drew himself up to his full height, his posture becoming ramrod straight, and executed a slow, perfect salute. It was not the casual gesture an admiral gives a junior officer. It was the crisp, formal salute a warrior gives to an equal, a gesture of deep, personal reverence. "Commander Sharma." The admiral's voice was firm, resonant with authority. "Your assessment of the simulation?" He had promoted her on the spot, his words slicing through the rigid naval hierarchy like a hot knife. The entire room snapped to attention, a forest of salutes rising in unison, following their leader's example. Anya Sharma, now officially a full commander, returned the Admiral's salute with a simple, clean motion. "The simulation is flawed, Admiral," she said, her voice still calm, still technical. "The failure algorithms are too predictable. They test a pilot's reaction, but they don't test their intuition." Rex Thorne felt the floor drop out from under him. He had been publicly shamed, his arrogance exposed as pure, unadulterated ignorance. His father hadn't just corrected him. He had annihilated him, using the quiet competence of the very person Rex had tried to destroy. The Admiral held his salute for a moment longer before dropping his hand. He turned his glacial gaze upon the assembled pilots, and finally upon his son. His voice was low, but it carried the chilling weight of a final judgment. "Let this be a lesson to every single person in this room," he began, his words deliberate and sharp. "Assumptions are the death of readiness. Ego is the enemy of excellence. You do not measure a warrior by the volume of their voice, but by the precision of their actions. You judge Commander Sharma by your own shallow metrics and found her wanting. You were wrong." He took a step towards his son, his shadow engulfing him completely. "Commander Thorne," he said, the title now sounding like an indictment. "You designed a scenario to test for weakness. What you failed to understand is that true strength, the kind that wins wars and saves lives, is often silent. It is calm. It is professional. It does not need to announce itself, because its results speak with a voice louder than any boast you could ever utter." He gestured back toward Sharma, who stood with quiet dignity amidst the sea of stunned faces. "This officer," the Admiral continued, his voice rising with a cold fire, "has forgotten more about high-performance aviation than you will ever know. She has flown in storms that would tear the wings off your bravado. She has faced real enemies, not digital ghosts. You demanded her rank be stripped. You demanded she be punished for possessing a composure you fundamentally misunderstand. Your demand is denied." The Admiral paused, letting the finality of his words settle over the room like a shroud. Then he delivered the final, devastating blow. Instead, he declared, his voice ringing with absolute authority, "I am amending her orders. Effective immediately, Commander Sharma is the new head of the Aviation Warfare Systems Program. She will be in charge of designing every simulation, every test, every crucible we use to train our pilots." He then looked directly at his son, his eyes devoid of any fatherly warmth, showing only the cold calculus of a fleet admiral assessing an asset. "And your first assignment under her command, Commander, will be to pass program Cerberus, unmodified, every day until she tells me you've finally learned the difference between being a pilot and being a warrior." A wave of shock rippled through the onlookers. It was a humbling, so total, so utterly comprehensive, that it would become the stuff of legend. The Admiral was not just punishing his son. He was forcing him to learn from the very person he had scorned, placing him in a position of direct subordination to his intellectual and professional superior. The message was unmistakable. Competence was the only currency that mattered. The story of what happened in Simulator Sphere 7 spread through the naval base like a shockwave. It traveled through encrypted chat channels, was whispered over lukewarm coffee in the mess halls, and debated in the hushed, reverent tones reserved for myth-making. It quickly acquired a name, the Sharma Protocol. It became a verb. Young, cocky ensigns who got too loud in the briefing rooms would be told by their instructors to throttle back before you get a Sharma Protocol pulled on you. It was a cautionary tale about the dangers of underestimation, a powerful reminder that the quietest person in the room was often the most dangerous. Commander Rex Thorne endured his punishment in stoic silence. Every morning, for 63 consecutive days, he would enter Simulator Sphere 7 and face the unforgiving wrath of Program Cerberus. And every day, he would fail. He was a good pilot, but he was a pilot of aggression and instinct. The simulation, as Sharma had correctly assessed, was a puzzle box that punished those exact traits. It required a different kind of thinking, a calm, analytical precision that was utterly alien to him. During this time, Anya Sharma, true to her nature, did not gloat. She did not lord her new position over him. Instead, she would simply leave a single, printed data sheet on his desk each morning. It was a breakdown of his previous day's failure, annotated with her own crisp, technical handwriting. Wasted 300 kilograms of fuel on unnecessary afterburner during evasion. Firing solution on Drone 7 was 2 seconds late. Be faster. Failed to anticipate secondary hydraulic failure post-engine seizure. It's a predictable pattern. Her notes were not insulting. They were clinical, impersonal, and brutally honest. They were the notes of a teacher, not a rival. On the 64th day, something changed. Rex entered the simulator not with frustration, but with a strange sense of calm. He didn't try to outfly the drone swarm. He guided his aircraft through it, following the precise, efficient flight path he had now seen Sharma execute in his mind 1,000 times. He didn't panic at the cascade failure. He breathed, steadied his hands, and began the complex process of rerouting the power, his fingers moving with a newfound, deliberate slowness. He made it to the carrier, and, on his first attempt, he landed. The score was a barely passing 72 out of 100, the aircraft integrity a dismal 45%, but it was a success. When he emerged from the sphere, drenched in sweat, but with a new light in his eyes, Sharma was waiting for him. She held out a data pad. "Your new project," she said, her voice even. "I need you to help me design program Chimera. It will be better than Cerberus. It will test intuition, not just reaction. It will make better pilots." It was not an order. It was an invitation. It was a gesture of professional respect, an acknowledgement that he had finally learned the lesson. Rex looked at the woman he had once dismissed, and for the first time, he saw her clearly. He saw the immense, quiet strength, the unshakable confidence that had no need for validation. "Yes, ma'am," he said, the words coming out with a humility he had never before possessed. It would be an honor. The legend of the Sharma Protocol became more than just a story. It became a piece of institutional culture. A framed photo of the final, impossible landing screen from her simulation run was hung on the wall of the training center's main hall. Below it, a simple brass plaque read, "The Sharma Landing Zone." Competence is a language of its own. The Admiral's public lesson had a profound ripple effect. Instructors began to change their teaching methods, emphasizing methodical problem-solving and calm under pressure over pure aggressive instinct. They started looking for the quiet ones, the observers, the thinkers, recognizing that the seeds of true mastery often grew in the soil of humility. Anya Sharma, for her part, remained unchanged by the fame she never sought. She led her new division with the same quiet efficiency she flew her aircraft. She mentored young pilots, not with grand speeches, but by sitting with them in the debriefing rooms, patiently walking them through their mistakes, teaching them to see the complex systems of the aircraft not as a machine to be tamed, but as a partner to be understood. She never once mentioned the incident with Rex Thorne. She didn't have to. The respect she now commanded was absolute, earned not through rank or title, but through a single, undeniable demonstration of superior skill. Her legacy wasn't in the story they told about her, but in the higher standards and deeper wisdom she instilled in the pilots who came after. She had proven, in the most dramatic way possible, that the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most important. A year later, a new class of naval aviation candidates filed into the main briefing hall of the Simulation and Warfare Center. They were the best of the best, brimming with the unshakable confidence of youth, each one believing they were destined to be the next great ace. They swaggered and joked, their voices echoing in the large space. The instructor for their introductory lecture walked to the podium, and the room fell silent. It was Commander Rex Thorne. He looked different. The arrogant edge was gone, replaced by a quiet, steady authority. He carried himself with a newfound gravity, the posture of a man who had been humbled by truth and was stronger for it. He didn't begin with a speech about glory or the thrill of combat. Instead, he simply tapped a button on the podium, and the holographic screen behind him lit up with the image of the F/A-37 Talon, parked perfectly on the carrier deck from Sharma's legendary simulation run. "Before you learn how to fly," Thorne began, his voice calm and measured, You must first learn a fundamental truth of our profession. Your ego is a liability. Your assumptions are a threat. The skills that will keep you alive when everything else has failed have nothing to do with how loudly you talk or how confident you feel. He paused, his gaze sweeping across the young, eager faces. We call this place the Sharma Landing Zone, he said, gesturing to the photo. It's named after an officer who, in the space of 30 minutes, taught an entire generation of pilots a lesson about competence. She reminded us that the most critical component in any aircraft is not the engine, not the weapons, but the calm, professional, and disciplined mind of the pilot. She taught me that respect is not a right of rank. It is a debt owed to skill. The story of the Sharma Protocol was now official doctrine, the foundational lesson for every new aviator. It had become institutional folklore, a modern myth with a powerful moral. It was the story of how quiet, demonstrated excellence would always, in the end, triumph over loud, superficial arrogance. Anya Sharma was not present for the lecture. She was thousands of miles away, strapped into the cockpit of another experimental craft, a sleek, hypersonic reconnaissance vehicle designated Aurora. She was pushing the envelope once again, flying on the edge of space, her focus absolute, her calm unwavering. She was not a legend to herself. She was simply a professional doing her job, her worth defined not by the stories told about her, but by the silent, perfect execution of her duty. Her legacy wasn't what she left behind in the briefing rooms. It was what continued forward in the improved skills and humbled attitudes of the pilots she inspired. True legacy isn't a monument of stone. It is the continuation of a standard, a quiet competence passed down from one generation to the next. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where professional skill defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.